Welcome, everybody. Our session is on creating your Living Our Vision Fund. This is a fully virtual, pre-recorded session. And if you are at General Assembly this year, some members of our Stewardship for Us team will be on site. Mark Ewart, Reverend Sarah Green, and Reverend Lydia Ferrante Roseberry. I'm Kay Kreider. I use she, her pronouns. I'm on the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people, who are now members of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon. We have much to learn from them, and acknowledgement is only a beginning. My home congregation is the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene, Oregon, and I'm here today as a Stewardship for Us consultant. Mark?
Thank you, Kay. And I'm Mark Ewart. I use he, him pronouns, and I am on the unceded land of the Anacostan Native American tribe. They were subsumed into the Piscataway tribe, which was never recognized by the U.S. federal government. I'm a member of All Souls Unitarian here in Washington, D.C. It's actually a picture of All Souls behind me there. And I am, along with Kay, a Stewardship for Us UU stewardship consultant. Now we're going to show you some slides, and I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what our whole agenda for the workshop today will be. I won't read you this slide, but I will tell you that what Kay and I hoped to do was give you some really good examples of real funds set up by UU congregations. And also we have a nonprofit that will be presenting that set up a fund like this so that you would see some good examples, but also to give you what you might need to consider setting up one of these funds yourself. So we've tried to be as comprehensive as we can be we can't tell you what to do and we can't give you all the materials that will work in your congregation, but we can give you an idea of the different elements and how some of them might work. So that was really our goal. Okay.
So, what is a Living Our Vision Fund? It's primarily was initially envisioned to fund strategic and visionary opportunities that arise. And some funds build into their governing documents that the funds can be used for resilience and sustainability under certain circumstances. And this type of fund is really separate from standard reserves that are often used for operating budget deficits or unexpected expenses. This fund is meant to help you move forward and seize an opportunity and fully live out your mission and values for things that arise that are new that you would like to do. So these funds are often invested once they reach a certain size, and they can produce income as well. But their primary purpose is to have a fund that's separate from your operating budget and separate from a traditional endowment that allows you to be visionary and strategic in your operations. So why should you create one? So these times demand that we step up and respond to what our congregations, our communities, and the wider world need. So the theme for this year's GA is Meet the Moment. And these types of funds provide leadership and the congregation the opportunity to be strategic rather than just doing business as usual. So typically, we have funds at congregations that are segmented in different areas. We have operating budget funds, we have reserves, we have traditional endowments where you have a principal that's usually restricted and then produces income depending on the size of the endowment. And then sometimes you have a capital fund, and those are often for building projects. So this kind of fund would be separate from that. And having a campaign for a sustainability fund or a Living Our Vision fund allows congregants to see the impacts of their gifts while they're still on this earth and part of the congregation. And so it's letting them live their values now Bequests are great too, of course, but they are in the future and they're often restricted from use when they're added to the principal of a traditional endowment fund.
Great. Thank you, Kay. So how do you create one of these funds? Um, it really depends on how your congregation is set up, what kind of governance you're operating under. But normally, um, because the board is the ultimate fiduciary, it's usually created by the board, um, sometimes with the recommendation of the finance team, and sometimes with some involvement from stewardship folks, and sometimes with a vote from the congregation. It really depends on how things work where you are. So you should definitely look at your governance model, your policies, your bylaws, and see what's possible where you are. Your policy should be clear on who decides how the fund is spent. You want to make sure that's very clear so you can avoid any future disagreement when you actually come to spending funds from the special fund that you set up. And you want to be transparent and inclusive during the creation of the process. You want to let people know as you go along so that when the fund launches, that people know what it's there for and people may be motivated to give. Now, Kay's going to talk a little bit about a congregation that has this type of fund.
So the Edmonds UU congregation that is in Washington State created their fund in 2024. And the fund was designed to be flexible and the principal can be spent. So the board is allowed to authorize up to 5%, according to their governing documents, to be spent out of the fund. And the congregation can authorize greater than 5% with a simple majority. So they've even rolled a portion of their traditional endowment into their Living Our Vision fund. And they made sure that the portion of the endowment that was rolled into that fit with the intent of those gifts that went into that portion of the endowment that was combined and merged into their Living Our Vision fund. So as you'll hear from Rachel Maxwell, who's a member of the Edmonds UU congregation, as well as part of our Stewardship for Us team, this fund is intended to help their congregation live out their values.
Hi, my name is Rachel Maxwell. I use they, she pronouns, and I am making this recording in my home in Edmonds, Washington, on the beautiful Salish Sea, land of the Coast Salish peoples. I was asked to talk to you about a fund that was created at my congregation, the Edmonds Unitarian Universalist Congregation. It's a new fund. Its name is the Living Our Vision Fund, which I love the fact that the acronym is LOV. So we put love at the center with this fund. But let me tell you the story a little bit about what it is and why we created this fund. My congregation had a couple of properties adjacent to our church facility property, and we were renting these two small houses out. But it wasn't purposeful. It wasn't mission related, and we had owned and done this for quite a number of years, over a decade for both of the properties. And we decided to put together a task force to talk about use of the properties, like what would be the most mission-based use that we could think of for the use of the properties. And a lot of process happened in order to get information from the congregation, and it was a multi-year process to determine what to do with the properties. Ultimately, we decided that selling the properties was the best use after determining that we could not do anything on them in partnership with another organization around low-income housing and other mission-related uses. So we determined to sell the properties. And then after we did that, we had a large amount of money and we needed to decide what to do with that money. And so we also had a process around that was, again, I felt a really good, strong process around involving the entire congregation in what to do with these funds. So there were a lot of different ideas, and ultimately we thought the most flexible way that we could use these funds was to create actually a new and special fund that wasn't the same kind of thing as our endowment, although we did decide to roll what endowment funds we had into this new Living Our Vision fund. So what is special about this fund, I would say, is the sort of rules applied to it, right? It was designed to be flexible. So right at the beginning of the policy statement, it says this fund is intended to be adaptable to changing circumstances, taking advantage of opportunities and contributing to current needs in the congregation, the community, and the world. So the fund has a very broad and important purpose in the world, which makes it exciting to give to, although we haven't yet started to work on having people make contributions. What we did was set up the fund with the monies that we had from the sale of the properties, plus our endowment fund. So we rolled our endowment fund into this new fund. And we also had a bequest that had come in just around that time, a fairly large bequest that also went into the fund. So we got to launch this fund just this past year because the congregation had to give its input on this policy as well. It was all very, very carefully done in order to honor the past and recognize the challenges of the present and the potential opportunities or needs in the future. So the fund gives us a really broad set of possibilities for use. So the other rules about it are that the board can include up to 5% of the fund in the annual budget without any special request thing happening around that. So it just gets voted on by the congregation in the annual budget. And they can also have another part of if they want to take more out for some special need or some special purpose, then they can do that by presenting that at a regular meeting or a special meeting for the purpose for the congregation, and put that request to a vote in the congregation. And it is just simple majorities that have to approve use of funds. So essentially, it's a really trust-based policy. It is not a policy that is trying to hold a lot of sort of control inside the policy. So what it's trying to do is just what it says. It's intended to be adaptable to changing circumstances. And since we all have lived through, some really remarkably changing circumstances in recent years, we understand that this kind of thing, we feel in my congregation anyway, are really quite necessary. Another maybe less important aspect that I wanted to share about what we did was that the policy itself contains essentially honoring of the history of our endowment and the people who launched that. So we say that there's a section of the policy that is about the history of our long-term funds, because part of what has been important to us when the people who started our endowment, who were founders of our congregation, and our congregation was founded in the late 1950s. When they started the endowment, they included an opportunity for us to make loans to seminary students. And we didn't use that aspect of that endowment fund for many, 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 many years. So a few years ago, we decided to take the corpus of that piece of the endowment and make a donation so that money would get used in the same spirit. So part of the history of our long-term funds, the history of that is inside, written right inside the policy, that we gave $25,000 to DRUM, Diverse Revolutionary Unitarian Universalist Multicultural Ministries, to initiate, or I think they initiated with it, the Unitarian Universalist Seminary Scholarship Fund, which we felt was really important to the history and intention of the origins of our endowment, which are now inside. We're part of it was given away to help create this fund, this scholarship fund at Drum, and part of it is inside of our Living Our Vision fund now, which we can flexibly use, and we're really excited about that. And I do recommend to congregations that they consider ways that they can sort of use funds that are set up to be replenishing with bequests and legacy giving, set up ways to use those funds so they're not just growing money. Like too often in the past, funds, from my perspective, have grown because they have policies that say you can use 4% or something per annum or up to that amount. And then they actually, though, made, on the market or however they were invested, well more than 4%. And I feel very strongly that Unitarian Universalist congregations are not in the business of growing money. We are in the business of growing values in the world. So my congregation, proudly, I am proud to say, the Edmonds Unitarian Universalist congregation created a new kind of much more flexible, adaptable fund in order to make manifest our mission of gathering together, nurturing the spirit, and living our vision of a just and sustainable world, to make that mission grow in our congregation, our community, and in our world.
So what kind of gifts create the fund? So current gifts from members, usually coming from savings or retirement. They're generally larger gifts, comparable in size to capital campaign gifts. So typically a specific campaign is run to create one of these funds. They can also be funded through bequests, depending on what your church governing policies are. Sometimes bequests are put in a particular place depending on the discretion of the board. Sometimes your endowment governing documents say that a bequest goes directly into the endowment. So you should consult your church documents, and if they don't align with how you think that it should work, then you need to have a discussion and propose how you think that they should be amended, if at all. Property sales, as you heard from Rachel, was one of the ways that they funded their new Living Our Vision Fund at the Edmonds congregation. You'll hear from Lori Maddox from a nonprofit about how they have had a little bit of grant funds go into their sustainability fund. Most of the money that goes into their fund is from donors, but there are organizations that do provide some grants to UU churches. They're usually regional, And so if you get a grant from them, you need to make sure it's okay with that foundation to put the grant in this type of fund, but it is a possibility. As part of this session, we wanted to give an example from the nonprofit world. And so you're going to hear an interview with Lori Maddox. She's the Associate Director of e-law and a Unitarian Universalist. She's going to explain how and why they started their sustainability fund back in 1996. And in addition to the board allocating some donations to the fund every year from donations that they get from individuals, they also had a specific combined campaign just before the pandemic to replenish their sustainability fund, which they have used. And there was $250,000 that was part of that campaign that was larger. It was more than $1 million total. That larger campaign raised money for a mortgage paydown as well and a couple of their programs. But then they had a chunk of it that was to replenish their sustainability fund. So I worked with ELA on this campaign, and they have used it for strategic opportunities and resilience, as you'll hear Lori say. And it's really been an important vehicle for them to live out their mission these past several years. So next, you'll hear the video from Lori, where she explains how they have established and used their fund.
My name is Lori Maddox. I use she, her pronouns. I'm sitting in Eugene, Oregon, on the land of the Kalapuya people, and I'm glad to be here. I'll say briefly that ELAW is a global network of public interest environmental lawyers working outside of governments and outside of corporations for communities and for environmental justice. We started in 1991. And we're now about 400 advocates in 80 countries around the world.
Great, thanks, Lori. And Lori is a UU as well, just so you have that context. Also shares our values. So, Lori, why did ELA set up your sustainability fund?
We set up our sustainability fund in 1996, so about 5 years after our founding. It was an initiative of a very smart, values-aligned tech entrepreneur who was on our board at the time and was encouraging us to learn from the private sector about ways that we could manage our resources to look for opportunities and protect ourselves against hard times. So Paul was his name, helped me design the sustainability fund and get the board involved in approving it.
And what were you hoping to make possible with this fund?
We wanted to not be constrained in the things that we could pursue.
Did the board have a particular vision for what they wanted this sustainability fund to be used for?
The board was very clear that they wanted it to be used to explore creative strategic opportunities in building our global network that we couldn't find other resources for.
And I know several years ago you did a big combined campaign, different than just your annual requests, and it had a couple of program expansions as part of that. It had a pay down your mortgage from your building, and then it had a replenish your sustainability fund. And so were those, a lot of those donations that helped replenish that fund, were those from just your donor base as opposed to a foundation?
Yes, and that's a good example of the board using the fund as an opportunity to explore growth. We were developing a new program to defend environmental defenders, and we wanted to expand our fellowship offerings. And so it's an example of the board choosing to use resources that they designate for to explore strategic opportunities for ELA.
And how do you manage this fund at ELA? Is it a separate account?
It is a separate account. It's held in a diverse investment portfolio that the board finance committee helps me manage. Yes. So we now I should have said earlier, also earn investment income on the fund.
Great. And do you feel like that the fund is fulfilling your goals when it was first established?
The security has enabled us to feel confident about exploring different program development. I think over the 3.5 decades that I've been doing this work, I've seen a transition in the foundation and individual donor community recognizing the critical importance of those unrestricted funds and walking their values, talking their values by investing deeply in the partners who they know are doing good work and not constraining so much the giving.
Thank you so much, Lori. This has been really helpful and an important piece for, I think, our congregations to hear about how a nonprofit who is values aligned has created a sustainability fund, a strategic opportunity fund, as you also called it, and how it has helped you do new things that are strategic, that aren't part of your typical operating budget. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom with us.
Thank you. It's exciting opportunity for UUs all over the country, I would say.
Great. So you heard Kay talking a little bit earlier about where gifts to create the fund might come from. So how do you actually begin funding it? Well, we recommend that you launch an actual campaign and ask for gifts. And be aware that this is communication as well as fundraising. So you want to include everyone and be communicating well about what you're doing. I would definitely recommend sitting with some members for an in-person conversation and request about this. And then you can use these initial gifts to inspire other people. Some congregations have done matching gift or challenge grants as part of launching this fund. So usually from other members who agree to do that. But you want to make sure that you let people know from the onset that this is intended to be a fund that goes on, and there'll be other opportunities for you to ask and receive gifts for this fund. It's an ongoing fund, in other words, with other opportunities to give. I'd like to give one example of a congregation that I've worked with, which is Eno River UU Fellowship, which is in Durham, North Carolina. They call it a strategic initiatives fund. It's actually been around for quite a while, I believe since 2018. I may not be correct about that, but that's what I believe. And the purpose of the fund is to accommodate their current growth. So Eno has been growing, and they're feeling a little restrained in their ability to manage the growth that they've already had, but also to create additional capacity for that growth. And then they're also planning on doing strategic financial planning. But before they could get there, they knew that they would need some funds to keep their growth trajectory happening. So it's also kind of a stopgap until they can do strategic financial planning and perhaps a campaign associated with that. They did it as part of a year-end campaign. So I don't know how many of you congregations do a year-end where you ask for gifts in the last part of the year, which is where a significant number of charitable gifts are given. But the Eno River Fellowship decided to combine this request for the Strategic Initiative Fund with their year end. They did have a generous member provide a good amount of money to create a challenge grant. So that person promised an amount of money. And if that amount was matched by the congregation, then those funds would be released. And that was successful. And they did it using a combination of major gift requests in person. So they made appointments with a number of different families in the congregation and sat with them and talked about the needs for this fund going forward. And then they went out with communication to all congregants to include them in this process, which I think is a good way to do it. And that general communication to everyone was part of their year-end process. So who decides on spending? It's important to be direct and clear on that. In some of the documents that we got from congregations that have started these funds, that was not always clearly stated. I think it was assumed by leadership that people would know. But I think it's important to be clear, because if it continues to stand, the people involved in the congregation may change. You just want to make sure that it's clear going forward. Often there's an origination document. So there's a document that establishes the fund. It's either a board document or it's a document that's brought to the congregation. You want to make sure that whatever you have laid out in that is clear, and also that you really follow that. So you don't want to start adopting other ways of working other than what is in that document, unless you formally change it. And then who decides on spending? It really depends on the governance of the congregation. The board is the ultimate fiduciary, but sometimes they delegate it, depending on the scale of the congregation and the way governance works. Sometimes it's delegated to the executive team, which is often led by the minister. Sometimes it's delegated to the finance team. Sometimes it's delegated to a special committee. But oftentimes it will come back to the board for final approval. Sometimes there's an internal granting program as well. In other words, this fund exists, but people within the congregation fill out a grant request to come out of this fund. I've not seen that as often, but that sometimes happens. And then always, Kay's already mentioned this, but we really believe that this should be oriented towards your mission and future impact rather than filling holes, is the intent of this kind of fund. So reporting to the congregation. In the documents that we've received from the different congregations, we have not really seen much about financial reporting articulated in those documents. However, I'm really mindful that whenever you report to the congregation, that's an opportunity for thanking people and for recognition. So I think it's an important thing to do, and you might want to include it in your documents. Normally, it would be part of financial reporting generally that's done during the annual meeting and the annual report, but there might be other ways of doing that as well. And you might want to consider donor acknowledgement so that you're giving members some options. So is there a plaque or is there a list somewhere that is kept of people who have made donations to this special fund? And how do people want to be acknowledged personally? So you might want to think about that. Some people may want to be entirely anonymous. So that's also important to consider.
Our goals today were to give you some takeaways and some specific information. And our hope is that by establishing a Living Our Vision fund, that you will have both financial resilience and ambitious ministries, that you can use this Living Our Vision fund to create. So make clear that it's for strategic use and to make manifest your congregation's values for opportunities that arise. And consider what gifts can do to meet the moment now, rather than giving money to gain earnings and stay in a fund that cannot be spent, or waiting for bequests. Thank you for your time and ongoing work in stewardship ministry. And thank you, Mark, for creating this together.
Thank you, Kay. If you have questions or need some help with stewardship in your congregation, we're about to show a slide that will give you a way to contact us. It'll also give you our website. So check out our website. It's got lots of good information on it, including a blog where we write lots about stewardship and different areas of stewardship and information from other congregations, actually. So you can search there also. So if you're looking for stuff about the pledge drive, just put pledge in the search function and some postings will show up. We also have regular web gatherings. They're announced through our email blast, and you can get our email blast by on the blog, putting your name and email address in the little boxes that are on the right. So thank you again, all.